What happens when two power-tripping cops decide to intimidate a quiet black woman walking her dog, not realizing she's a lethal Delta Force commander who has faced enemies far more dangerous than them? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The neighborhood had the kind of stillness that only late afternoon could bring, where sunlight stretched long across trimmed lawns and the hum of distant traffic softened into the background like a fading memory. Evelyn Pierce moved along the sidewalk with measured steps, one hand loosely holding the leash of her German Shepherd, Rex. To anyone watching, she looked like nothing more than another resident enjoying the quiet end of the day, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable in a way that most would mistake for simple calm. Rex padded beside her with quiet confidence, his ears flicking at every subtle sound, a mirror of the woman at his side. There was a rhythm between them, something practiced and unspoken, as if both understood the world in ways others did not. Evelyn's eyes drifted across the street, noting the slight movement of curtains, the distant bark of a dog 2 houses down, the slow roll of a car approaching from the corner long before it came into view. It was not paranoia. It was habit carved into her over years that had demanded awareness as a condition for survival. She wore a simple gray hoodie and dark jeans, nothing that would draw attention, nothing that hinted at the weight of experience carried beneath that ordinary exterior. The neighbors who occasionally passed her offered polite nods, the kind reserved for someone familiar but not known. None of them saw the precision in her stride, the way her shoulders remained aligned, the subtle readiness in her hands. They saw what they expected to see, and Evelyn allowed it. Rex paused briefly near a patch of grass, sniffing with casual interest before continuing forward at her gentle cue. Evelyn's grip on the leash never tightened, never needed to. Control did not come from force. It came from understanding. A breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and distant asphalt warming under the sun, and for a moment, the world felt quiet enough to exist without interruption. Evelyn exhaled slowly, letting the tension she never fully acknowledged settle just beneath the surface where it always stayed. This walk, this routine, was one of the few constants she allowed herself. No noise, no commands, no chows, just the steady sound of Rex's paws against concrete and the soft rhythm of her own breathing. But even in that calm, there was something else, a faint shift in the atmosphere, the kind of subtle change most people would ignore, but one she felt immediately. Somewhere behind the stillness, something had begun to move. The shift sharpened into something tangible as the low rumble of an engine rolled closer, tires crunching lightly against the edge of the pavement. Evelyn did not turn immediately. She did not need to. The reflection in a nearby window told her everything before the vehicle even came to a full stop. A black and white patrol car, creeping slower than necessary, its presence deliberate rather than routine. Rex felt it too. His ears angled back for a brief second, then forward again, his body aligning subtly closer to Evelyn's leg without being told. The leash remained loose, but the connection between them tightened in a way that had nothing to do with tension and everything to do with instinct. The cruiser idled beside the curb, engine humming with a quiet authority that seemed to demand attention. Evelyn finally turned her head, her gaze settling on the vehicle with a calm that did not invite conversation but did not avoid it either. The driver's side window rolled down with a slow mechanical glide, revealing Officer Kyle Mercer leaning slightly out, his forearm resting casually against the door as if he had all the time in the world. His partner, Officer Brian Holt, sat rigid in the passenger seat, eyes already locked on Evelyn with an intensity that felt less like observation and more like judgment. Mercer's lips curled into something that resembled a smile but lacked any warmth. "Afternoon," he called out, his voice carrying just enough volume to assert control over the quiet street. Evelyn stopped walking. Rex halted with her posture steady, head level. "Afternoon, officer," she replied, her tone even, measured, offering nothing beyond basic civility. Mercer's gaze drifted from her face down to Rex, then back up again, lingering a second too long, as if searching for something that justified the interruption. Holt shifted in his seat, pushing the door open with a sharp motion before stepping out onto the pavement. His boots struck the ground with a deliberate heaviness, each step toward Evelyn calculated to close distance rather than bridge it. "You live around here?" Holt asked, his voice edged with suspicion that felt rehearsed rather than earned. Evelyn held his gaze, unflinching. "Yes." A single word. "No elaboration." Mercer let out a quiet breath through his nose, as though the simplicity of her answer irritated him. "Funny," he said, glancing briefly at Holt before returning his attention to her. "We do not remember seeing you before." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, not in confusion, but in acknowledgement of the statement's intent. "I travel." Holt's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as if her composure itself was an offense. He circled a few steps to the side, creating a subtle angle that boxed her in without ever stating it outright. "Mind showing some ID?" he pressed, his tone losing any pretense of casual conversation. Evelyn's fingers adjusted slightly on the leash, not tightening, just repositioning. Rex remained still, his presence quiet but unmistakably alert. "Is there a reason I need to?" she asked, her voice calm, each word placed carefully. Mercer's expression shifted, the thin smile fading into something more rigid. "We got reports of someone suspicious in the area," he said, tapping two fingers against the car door in a slow, impatient rhythm. "You match the description." The words hung there, vague and heavy, designed to corner rather than clarify. Evelyn's eyes did not waver. The street, once peaceful, now felt smaller, as if the space itself had been compressed by the weight of authority pressing in from both sides. Rex's tail stilled completely, his body aligned like a coiled spring held firmly in check. Evelyn exhaled once, slow and controlled, her posture unchanged. But the quiet had shifted, and whatever was coming next was no longer subtle. The quiet pressure in the air hardened into confrontation as Holt took another step closer, closing the last polite distance that usually separated authority from intrusion. His presence loomed now, not overwhelming in size, but in intent, his shoulders squared, chin slightly raised as if daring Evelyn to challenge him. Mercer pushed open his door and stepped out as well, the soft thud of it shutting behind him echoing faintly against the stillness of the neighborhood. Together, they formed a loose wall around her, not touching, not yet, but positioned in a way that made it clear she was no longer free to simply walk away. Evelyn remained exactly where she stood, her posture upright, her breathing steady, her gaze moving between them without urgency. Rex adjusted his stance, stepping half a pace forward, placing himself slightly ahead of Evelyn's leg. His body did not tense outwardly, but there was a quiet readiness in the way his muscles aligned, his focus locked on Holt as the officer edged closer. "Let us not make this difficult," Holt said, his voice dropping lower, less conversational now, more directive. His hand hovered near his belt, fingers brushing against the edge of his radio before settling again, a subtle display meant to remind her of what he represented. Evelyn's expression did not change. "I'm not making anything difficult," she replied, her tone level, each word measured with precision. "You approached me." Mercer let out a faint scoff, pacing a slow arc to her left, his boots scraping lightly against the pavement. He tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle he had already decided was simple. "See, that right there," he said, gesturing vaguely toward her with two fingers, "that attitude. That is what gets people into trouble." Evelyn's eyes flicked toward him briefly, then returned to Holt. "Asking for a reason is not an attitude. It is a question." Holt's jaw tightened, the muscles along his cheek shifting as his patience began to thin. He took another step forward, now close enough that the space between them felt intentional, controlled. "You fit a description," he repeated, slower this time, as if speaking to someone he believed needed things spelled out. "We asked for ID. You have not provided it. That makes you suspicious." Rex let out a low, almost inaudible rumble, not aggressive, not a threat, but a warning shaped by instinct. Holt's eyes dropped immediately to the dog, his expression sharpening. "You need to control your animal," he snapped, the edge in his voice cutting through the air. Evelyn's hand shifted slightly on the leash, not pulling Rex back, simply grounding him with a subtle motion. "He is under control," she said calmly. Mercer circled a step closer on her other side, narrowing the gap further, his presence pressing in like a closing vice. "Does not look like it," he muttered, his gaze lingering on Rex with growing irritation. Then, with deliberate slowness, he extended his hand outward, not touching, but reaching just close enough to provoke a reaction. Rex's posture changed instantly, his head lowering a fraction, eyes fixed, a quiet signal that the line was being tested. Evelyn's voice came, low and firm. "Do not do that." Mercer paused, his hand still hovering in the space between them. He glanced up at her, a thin smile forming, not amused but challenged. "Or what?" he asked softly. The question hung there, heavy with implication. Evelyn did not raise her voice. She did not step back. "Or you'll create a situation that does not need to exist." Holt exhaled sharply, shaking his head as if he had already made up his mind about her. "You hear that?" he said to Mercer, a hint of mockery creeping into his tone. "She's telling us what to do now." Mercer's smile widened slightly, his fingers twitching just enough to edge closer toward Rex again. The balance was gone now. Whatever was about to happen was no longer avoidable. The fragile line between restraint and escalation snapped the moment Mercer's fingers drifted just a fraction closer to Rex's face, close enough to invade the animal's space, close enough to provoke exactly what he wanted. Rex's body responded instantly, a deep, controlled growl rolling from his chest, not chaotic, not uncontrolled, but deliberate, a clear warning shaped by instinct and discipline. Evelyn's hand tightened slightly on the leash, not yanking, not panicking, simply reinforcing the boundary. "That is enough," she said, her voice low, steady, carrying a weight that did not need volume to be heard. Mercer did not pull his hand back. Instead, his smile sharpened, his eyes narrowing as if the reaction confirmed something he had already decided. "There it is," he muttered, glancing briefly at Holt. "Aggressive animal." Holt shifted his stance, angling himself closer, his boots scraping against the pavement as he leaned in, eyes fixed on Rex with a mixture of irritation and opportunity. "You see that?" Holt said, his voice rising just enough to sound official. "Dog's a threat." Evelyn's gaze locked on Holt now, unflinching, her posture unchanged despite the tightening circle around her. "He is responding to you, provoking him," she replied evenly. "Step back, and he will settle." Holt let out a short, dismissive breath, shaking his head as if her words were irrelevant. "That is not how this works," he snapped. Mercer finally withdrew his hand, but only to rest it casually near his belt, his thumb hooking against the edge as his body language shifted from taunting to something more rigid, more assertive. "We have a potentially dangerous situation here," Mercer said, his tone adopting a rehearsed authority that sounded more like performance than protocol. "And you are not cooperating." Evelyn's eyes flicked between them, reading the shift, recognizing the pattern. This was no longer about suspicion. This was about control. "I have done nothing to justify this," she said, her voice still calm, still measured, though there was a firmness beneath it now, something unyielding. Holt took another step forward, close enough now that the space between them felt intentional, invasive. His hand hovered near his holster, not drawing, but reminding. "You're going to provide identification," he said slowly, each word pressed forward with force, "or we're going to escalate this situation." Rex's growl deepened slightly, his body shifting just enough to place himself fully between Evelyn and Holt. The movement was precise, protective without being reckless. Evelyn did not pull him back. She simply adjusted her stance behind him, her presence steady, grounded. Mercer's expression hardened, the earlier smugness, now edged with irritation as control slipped just out of his grasp. "Call it," he said under his breath to Holt, though loud enough for Evelyn to hear. Holt did not hesitate. His hand lifted toward his radio, pressing the button with a sharp motion. "Dispatch, we have a non-compliant individual with an aggressive dog," he reported, his voice clipped, authoritative, each word chosen to build a narrative that justified what came next. Evelyn's eyes did not leave him. Her face remained composed, but there was a shift now, subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone who did not know what to look for. The calm was still there, but beneath it, something colder had settled into place. Mercer took a step back, creating just enough distance to give himself room, his posture widening, his stance more deliberate. His hand moved from resting near his belt to hovering just above it, fingers flexing once, as if preparing. "Last chance," he said, his voice no longer casual, no longer mocking. It was firm now, edged with impatience. "Control the dog. Show us ID, or we handle it." The words lingered in the air, heavy with implication. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her gaze steady, her voice quiet but unmistakably resolute. "You are the ones creating this." And in that moment, the tension reached a point where there was no longer any room left for de-escalation. And in that moment, the tension reached a point where there was no longer any room left for de-escalation. Mercer's patience snapped first. His hand moved with sudden decisiveness, not hesitant, not uncertain, but driven by a need to assert control. He felt slipping away. "I told you to control the dog," he barked, his voice cutting through the quiet street like a whip. Rex reacted instantly to the sharp shift in tone and movement, stepping forward half a pace, his growl no longer subtle, but still measured, still contained. Evelyn's grip on the leash tightened just enough to anchor him, her voice calm but firm. "Rex, stay." The command was quiet, but it carried authority. Rex obeyed, his body still coiled, his focus locked, but he did not advance. That should have been the end of it. It should have been enough. It was not. Holt's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he interpreted control as defiance. "That dog is a threat," he said sharply, his hand now hovering closer to his weapon. Evelyn's gaze snapped to him, something colder settling into her eyes. "He is standing still," she said, each word deliberate. "You are escalating this." Mercer's jaw clenched, his breathing uneven now, irritation bleeding into something more volatile. "I'm not taking chances," he snapped. His hand dropped fully to his weapon, fingers wrapping around it with a familiarity that came too easily. The motion was fast, but not panicked. It was worse than that. It was casual. Evelyn saw it before it fully happened. Her voice came, sharper now, no longer just calm but commanding. "Do not do that." For a fraction of a second, everything seemed to hold. The air, the sound, the space between them. Rex shifted again, not lunging, not attacking, but reacting to the rising threat, his protective instinct pulling him forward just enough to place himself squarely between Evelyn and the two officers. That was all Mercer needed. The crack of the gunshot shattered the stillness. It echoed down the quiet street, bouncing off houses and cutting through. The calm like a blade. Birds scattered from nearby trees. A car alarm chirped in the distance. Rex's body jerked, the momentum of his movement interrupted mid-step. Then he collapsed. The leash went slack in Evelyn's hand. For a moment, there was no sound at all. Mercer lowered the weapon slowly, his chest rising and falling, his face set in a rigid expression that tried to mask what he had just done as necessity. Holt exhaled sharply, stepping back a fraction, eyes flicking between Rex and Evelyn as if bracing for a reaction. But Evelyn did not scream. She did not rush forward. She did not plead or argue. She stood perfectly still, her hand still holding the leash, her gaze fixed on the space where Rex had been standing just seconds before. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Then, slowly she moved. Evelyn knelt beside Rex, her movements controlled, deliberate, as if every action had to pass through a filter of discipline before it could exist. Her hand rested gently against his side, fingers pressing lightly into his fur, confirming what she already knew. Her face did not break. No tears, no outward grief. Just a stillness, so complete it felt unnatural. Mercer shifted his weight, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face before he forced it away. "Should have controlled your dog," he muttered, though his voice lacked the earlier confidence. Evelyn did not respond. She remained there for a few seconds longer, her hands still resting on Rex, her head slightly bowed. Then she rose. Slowly. Precisely. The leash hung loose from her hand now, swaying faintly in the quiet air. When she looked up, her expression had changed. Not louder, not angrier, just colder, and far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. Evelyn stood motionless, the leash hanging loosely from her hand, her gaze steady on Mercer as the last trace of warmth drained from her expression. The street had gone unnaturally quiet, as if even the wind had decided to hold its breath. Mercer shifted first, rolling his shoulders as though shaking off something he did not want to acknowledge. He holstered his weapon with a deliberate motion, his jaw set tight, his voice returning with forced authority. "All right," he said, glancing at Holt. "We are done playing around." Holt nodded immediately, stepping forward with renewed confidence now that the line had been crossed. "Turn around," he ordered sharply, already reaching toward the handcuffs at his belt. "Hands behind your back." Evelyn did not move. Her eyes remained fixed, unblinking, her posture unchanged. Holt took another step closer, irritation flashing across his face. "You deaf?" he snapped. "I said turn around." Evelyn's voice came then, low and controlled, cutting through the tension without raising in volume. "You should think very carefully about what you do next." The words were not loud, but they carried weight, the kind that settled into the space between them and refused to be ignored. Holt paused for half a second, caught off guard by the tone more than the words themselves. Mercer let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head as he stepped slightly to the side, watching her with narrowed eyes. "Oh, here we go," he muttered. "You gonna threaten us now?" Evelyn did not react to the mockery. She took one slow breath, then spoke again, each word deliberate. "You have already made a mistake you cannot undo. Do not make it worse." Mercer's lips curled into a smirk, the kind that came from a man who had spent too long believing consequences were things that happened to other people. He took a step closer, invading her space deliberately, his voice dropping into something quieter, more condescending. "Let me explain something to you," he said, tilting his head slightly. "You do not get to decide what is a mistake here. We do." Holt recovered from the brief hesitation, his expression hardening again as he pulled the handcuffs free, the metal glinting faintly in the fading sunlight. "Last chance," he said, his tone flat, impatient. "Turn around. Now." Evelyn's gaze shifted briefly to the cuffs, then back to his face. There was no fear there, no anger, just a stillness that felt completely out of place given the situation. "If you put those on me," she said quietly, "you are not going to like what happens next." Mercer laughed under his breath, the sound short and dismissive. "What? You could call a lawyer," he shot back. "You think that scares us?" Evelyn's eyes did not leave his. "No," she replied. "I think you have no idea what you're dealing with." For a brief moment, something flickered across Holt's face again, a hesitation he could not quite suppress. But Mercer saw it, and it irritated him more than anything Evelyn had said. He straightened, his voice snapping with renewed authority. "Do it," he ordered. "Cuff her." Holt stepped forward, reaching for Evelyn's arm with a firm grip, his fingers closing around her wrist as he began to pull it behind her back. Evelyn did not resist. She allowed the movement, her body compliant in a way that only made the moment feel more controlled, more intentional. As Holt positioned the cuffs, Mercer leaned in slightly, his voice low, almost mocking. "You should have just cooperated," he said. Evelyn's gaze lifted slightly, meeting his one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. "You just lost your last chance." Mercer smiled, slow and dismissive, completely certain of his control. And with that, he sealed his own fate. Mercer smiled, slow and dismissive, completely certain of his control. And with that, he sealed his own fate. The cuff clicked around Evelyn's wrist, firm and final. Holt reached for her other arm, guiding it behind her back with a grip that was meant to dominate, to assert ownership over the moment. Evelyn allowed it for exactly 1 second longer. Then everything changed. Her posture shifted, not violently, not suddenly, but with a precision so controlled it barely registered as movement. Her shoulders straightened, her spine aligning with a kind of discipline that did not belong to a civilian being detained on a quiet suburban street. Holt felt it before he understood it. The arm in his grip did not tense, did not resist, but it stopped yielding. Completely. Like trying to move something rooted far deeper than muscle. "Wait," Evelyn said, her voice no longer quiet in the same way. It was still calm, but now it carried command. Not a request, not a warning, a directive. Holt froze, just for a fraction of a second, his instincts clashing with his training. Mercer frowned, the first crack in his confidence appearing as he watched the shift unfold. Evelyn turned her head slightly, just enough to look at Mercer directly over her shoulder. Her eyes were no longer passive, no longer restrained. They were sharp, focused, the kind of gaze that measured outcomes, not possibilities. "You will remove those," she said evenly. Mercer scoffed, but it came out thinner than before. "You do not give orders here." Evelyn did not raise her voice. She did not move abruptly. She simply spoke again, slower this time, each word landing with deliberate weight. "Commander Evelyn Pierce, United States Army, Delta Force." The name hung in the air like something heavy enough to bend the moment around it. Holt's grip faltered instantly. His fingers loosened without him realizing it, his mind scrambling to process what he had just heard. Mercer blinked, once, then again, as if the words did not align with the image he had constructed in his head. Evelyn continued, her tone unchanged, her gaze unwavering. "You just discharged your weapon without cause. You just detained a ranking special operations commander without justification. And you did it on a public street." Silence swallowed the space between them. Holt stepped back slightly, the movement unconscious, his hand hovering uncertainly near the cuff, still locked around Evelyn's wrist. His eyes darted to Mercer, searching for confirmation, denial, anything that could ground the situation back into something familiar. Mercer's face had lost its color, the rigid confidence draining away as the implications began to settle in. That is not," he started, but the words failed him. Evelyn turned fully now. Despite the cuff, her movement controlled, forcing Holt to adjust awkwardly just to keep hold. Her presence filled the space in a way it had not before, not louder, not aggressive, but undeniable. "You had every opportunity to step back," she said, her voice steady, final. "You chose not to." Holt swallowed hard, his throat tightening as realization took hold, his earlier certainty collapsing under the weight of what they had done. Mercer's hand hovered uselessly near his belt, no longer a symbol of control, but a reminder of how badly he had miscalculated. Evelyn held their gaze, unflinching, her voice dropping just enough to carry a final, chilling clarity. "Now you answer for it." And for the first time since they stepped out of that cruiser, neither officer looked in control of anything at all. And for the first time since they stepped out of that cruiser, neither officer looked in control of anything at all. The shift was immediate, almost physical, like the ground beneath Mercer and Holt had tilted just enough to throw off their balance. Holt's hand moved first, fumbling slightly as he reached for the cuff around Evelyn's wrist, his earlier grip gone, replaced with something uncertain, almost careful. I did not know," he muttered, his voice no longer sharp, no longer commanding, but strained, searching for footing that was no longer there. Evelyn did not respond. She stood still, allowing him to remove the restraint, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady, as if the outcome had already been decided long before this moment. Mercer remained frozen for a beat longer, his mind visibly racing, trying to reconcile the narrative he had built with the reality now standing in front of him. The confidence that once filled his stance had drained away, leaving behind rigid hesitation. This is a misunderstanding," he said finally, but even to his own ears, it sounded hollow. Evelyn's eyes met his, and for the first time, Mercer could not hold the gaze. The distant sound of approaching vehicles broke the silence, low at first, then growing louder, more defined. Not one car. Several. Mercer's head turned toward the sound, his expression tightening as dark government SUVs rolled into the street with controlled precision, engines quiet but presence overwhelming. Doors opened in unison. Men stepped out, their movements sharp, efficient, their posture carrying a level of authority that did not need to be announced. Their eyes scanned once, assessed everything, and locked onto Evelyn. One of them, a senior officer, moved forward without hesitation, his voice firm, direct. "Commander Hayes." Evelyn gave a single nod, nothing more. "No explanation. No dramatics." The man's attention shifted instantly to Mercer and Holt, and the temperature of the moment dropped even further. "Step away," he ordered. Not loudly, not aggressively, but with absolute expectation of compliance. Holt stepped back immediately, hands lifting slightly as if distance alone might undo what had already been done. Mercer hesitated for half a second too long before following, his movements stiff, his face pale under the weight of realization. Another agent approached, his gaze fixed on Mercer's holster. "Remove your weapon," he said. Mercer's hand moved slowly, carefully now, nothing like the casual ease from before. He unholstered it and handed it over without a word. Holt followed suit, his fingers unsteady as he complied. Evelyn remained where she was, silent, watching, her presence anchoring the scene. The senior officer turned back to her briefly, his tone respectful. "We had it from here, ma'am." Then his attention snapped back to the two officers, his voice hardening. "Officers Kyle Mercer and Brian Holt, you are being detained pending investigation for unlawful use of force, abuse of authority, and improper detention." The words landed with finality. Holt's shoulders sagged, the last of his composure slipping as the reality closed in. Mercer opened his mouth as if to argue, then stopped, the fight draining out before it could even form. Their hands were guided behind their backs, not roughly, not theatrically, but with the same controlled precision they had once tried to impose on Evelyn. The difference was unmistakable. There was no arrogance here, only consequence. As they were escorted toward the waiting vehicles, neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the sudden activity, their eyes wide as they took in the reversal unfolding before them. Evelyn stood quietly at the edge of it all, the leash still in her hand, the absence at the other end heavier than anything else in the moment. She did not speak. She did not need to. Justice had already begun to move, and this time it was not something Mercer or Holt could control. Justice had already begun to move, and this time it was not something Mercer or Holt could control. The vehicles pulled away slowly, carrying them out of the neighborhood they had once patrolled with unchecked authority, leaving behind a silence that felt different now, no longer tense, no longer uncertain. The gathered neighbors lingered at the edges of their lawns and driveways, their conversations hushed, their expressions shifting from confusion to understanding as the weight of what they had witnessed settled in. A few eyes turned toward Evelyn, not with curiosity, but with something closer to respect, the kind that did not need words. The senior officer approached her once more, his tone measured, professional, yet carrying a quiet acknowledgement. "Commander Hayes, arrangements are being made," he said. "If there is anything you need," he let the sentence trail, understanding that some things could not be addressed so simply. Evelyn gave a small nod, her gaze drifting briefly to the empty space beside her, where the leash still hung, its gentle sway now the only movement. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady, though softer than before. The officer inclined his head, then stepped back, signaling to his team. The controlled efficiency that had arrived with them began to recede, vehicles starting, doors closing, presence withdrawing as quickly and precisely as it had come. Within minutes, the street began to return to its natural rhythm. A breeze moved through the trees again, carrying the faint rustle of leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower resumed its low hum, as if the world itself was stitching the moment back together. Evelyn remained for a few seconds longer, standing in the quiet space left behind. Then, slowly she knelt. Her movements were the same as before, deliberate, composed, but now there was something gentler in them, something personal. She reached down, her fingers brushing against Rex's collar, unclipping it with care. The metal tag caught the light briefly as she held it in her palm. No ruse, no spectacle, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had been lost. When she stood again, the leash and collar rested together in her hand. She turned toward her home, her steps steady, measured, each one placed with the same discipline that had carried her through far greater storms than this. The neighbors did not speak, but they watched, their silence no longer passive, but respectful. A man across the street removed his cap, holding it briefly at his side. A woman near the corner placed a hand over her chest, her expression softening. Evelyn did not look toward them, but she felt it, the shift, the recognition that had replaced the earlier distance. She walked up the path to her front door, paused for just a moment, then stepped inside. The door closed quietly behind her, sealing the space, returning her to the stillness she had chosen long before any of this began. Outside, the street settled fully back into its calm, the shadows stretching longer as the sun dipped lower. What remained was not the echo of conflict, but the quiet certainty that something had been corrected, that a line had been crossed and then firmly redrawn. And somewhere within that silence, justice did not feel loud or triumphant. It felt steady, earned, and finally complete.